The night I told my roommate I'd just gotten back from a date. She was standing at the kitchen counter, reading the back of a cereal box like it contained genuinely important information. She didn't look up. She said, "How'd it go?" in the same tone she used to ask if we were out of dish soap. I said, "Pretty good, actually." And Renata Voss set the cereal box down, turned around, and said, "She's not going to love you the way I do. Not quietly. Not like she was testing the words. Like she had already lived with them for a long time, and they had finally gotten tired of waiting." My name is Ben Hartley. I was 26, 18 months into a job as a structural technician for a mid-size firm in Halifax, and I had been living with Renata for almost 2 years in a third-floor apartment on Roby Street that smelled like old radiator heat, and whatever coffee she burned every morning because she refused to accept that her French press had a steep time. We were not supposed to become anything. We were supposed to split a $1,200 rent. Her previous roommate had moved back to Sudbury. My sublet in the South End fell through 3 days before the lease started. A coworker named Phil said we were both responsible adults, which I now understand was Phil's way of saying he didn't want to be involved in whatever happened next. The first week, Renata left a handwritten list on the fridge. No food left in the sink strainer. No loud calls after 10. Don't use her good knife for anything that isn't actually food. I added one item at the bottom. No moving my tools from the hallway closet. She looked at it and said, "You have a level and 2 screwdrivers. That's not tools, that's a starter kit." That was Renata. Precise, a little merciless, funny, in ways she didn't seem to intend. She was 25, finishing a master's in environmental policy at Dalhousie, with dark hair that she wore, in whatever configuration was fastest that morning, and a way of looking at you while you talked that made you feel like she was quietly building a case. For the first 2 months, we were polite the way strangers with shared walls are polite. Then a pipe burst in the bathroom the week before Christmas, and we spent 4 days in the same 40-square-foot kitchen while the landlord sorted it out, and polite stopped being something either of us had the bandwidth for. After that, things became honest, then comfortable. Then something I kept refusing to name because naming it would have meant doing something about it, and she was my roommate, and we had 8 months left on the lease. By the time spring came around, I knew she only cleaned when she was stressed. I knew she reread emails out loud before sending them and then sent them anyway with a look of slight regret. She knew I got quiet when people complimented my work because I always assumed a request was coming. She knew I called my mother every Sunday from the living room and that I laughed more on those calls than anywhere else. The problem with knowing someone that well is that it makes everything else feel like approximation, which is probably why I said yes when Ingrid from my project team asked if I wanted to get dinner. Ingrid was good. I want to be clear about that. She was sharp, easy to talk to, worked in urban transit planning, and laughed at the same things I did. There was no good reason the evening should have felt like wearing shoes on the wrong feet. But all through dinner, I kept making the same useless comparison. Ingrid asked about my 5-year plan. Renata had once looked at my 5-year plan, which I had written on a grocery receipt, and said, "This is either a career roadmap or a list of things you'll feel guilty about not doing." Hard to tell. Ingrid said my work sounded meaningful. Renata would have said, "Meaningful is what people call it when the pay isn't keeping up with the scope." I got home a little after 10:30. The kitchen light was on. Renata was at the counter, cereal box in hand, wearing the oversized Dalhousie hoodie she'd had since undergrad. "How'd it go?" she asked without looking up. "Pretty good, actually." That's when she set the box down. "She's not going to love you the way I do." The kitchen went still. Renata's face changed the second she heard herself, like she had reached for something on a high shelf and accidentally knocked everything else down. "That came out wrong," she said. "No, it didn't. Ben, it didn't come out wrong." She turned back to the counter like she had something to do there. She didn't. Her hands rested flat on the laminate, and I could see her deciding whether to keep talking or start building an exit. "I'm tired," she said. "That's not what you meant." "It can be both, Renata." She turned around. Her chin was up, the way it got when she was preparing for an argument she already knew she was going to lose. "Don't say my name like that." "Like what?" "Like you're about to be calm and patient. I find it destabilizing." That almost made me smile. Almost. But I looked at her face, and the humor was sitting on top of something much bigger, and I didn't want to make this easy when easy was exactly what we'd been doing for 2 years. I leaned against the doorframe. What did you mean? She exhaled slowly. I meant I've watched you try to convince yourself that fine is enough, and it's frustrating, and I said something I shouldn't have said out loud. Which part are you walking back? The content or the timing? Both. You can't walk back the content. She looked at me, and something behind her eyes shifted, just slightly. I know. I crossed the kitchen and sat at the table, not close enough to corner her. She stayed near the counter. The radiator clicked once in the silence. You don't have to make it smaller, I said. I'm not making it smaller. I'm trying to survive it. Her voice came down. You came home from a date looking like you'd just gotten back from a meeting you weren't sure had gone well. And I actually thought, standing here with a box of cereal. There she is. The version of you that puts the good shirt on and asks the right questions and wonders afterward if it's supposed to feel easier than this. I didn't say anything. And I'm here, she said. In the hoodie, knowing you haven't eaten since noon, because you always forget lunch before a site visit. Knowing you say, everything's fine, when your project lead questions your numbers, even though it bothers you for days. Knowing you called your mom twice this week, which means something's off, but you're not ready to say what. She stopped. I know too much of you, and she doesn't know any of it yet. That's not necessarily bad, I said. No. She looked at me. But it means she's going to fall for the version of you that's already edited, and I already fell for the draft. The room held that sentence for a moment. Then her phone lit up on the counter. She looked at it. I looked at it. Ingrid? She asked. Probably. She nodded once and looked away. Not hurt exactly. Something quieter. Like she had just confirmed a number she had been trying not to do the math on. I picked up the phone. Ingrid had sent 2 messages. Had a really nice time. No pressure at all. But I'd love to do it again before the summer gets busy. I put the phone face down. Answer it, Renata said. Not tonight. Ben, don't make me the reason you're rude to someone who did nothing wrong. I'm not answering because of you. I'm not answering because I don't know how to do it honestly right now, and she deserves honesty. That quieted her. She pulled out the chair across from mine and sat down, slowly, like the night had gotten heavier than she'd planned for. Outside, a car moved down Roby Street. The radiator clicked again. When did this start? I asked. She stared at the table. That is not a safe question, I know. For which of us? Both, probably. She almost smiled. Then she looked at her hands. I don't know exactly. Maybe February, when your heat wasn't working, and you slept on the couch for 3 nights because you didn't want to bother the landlord at midnight, and you kept saying you were fine, and you clearly were not fine. She paused. I brought you an extra blanket, and you said thank you, like I'd done something large. And I stood in the hallway afterward thinking, that's the thing. He says thank you like kindness surprises him, and that is going to be a problem for me. I was quiet. And then I thought, he's my roommate, and I have a thesis, and this is a bad idea. She looked up, so I wrote it off, and then kept writing it off. For about 8 months. You could have said something. So could you. That stopped me. I thought it was just proximity, I said. I thought I was making too much of it. The grocery runs and the Sunday evenings and the way you leave a light on when I'm working late. She blinked. You noticed that. Every time her throat moved. I didn't know you noticed. I didn't want you to know I noticed. Because if I was wrong, I wasn't just losing things being easy. I was losing my favorite place to come back to. The last part came out quieter than I meant it to, but I didn't pull it back. Renata looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, I need to tell you something. Okay. She reached across the table and turned her laptop toward me. I looked at the screen. It was a confirmation email. Congratulations. You have been selected for the Federal Environmental Policy Fellowship. Placement, Ottawa. Start date, September 3rd. I read it twice. How long have you had this? I asked. Since Thursday. It's Sunday. I know. Renata. I know. Her voice got careful. I didn't know how to tell you. I wasn't even sure I was going to accept it. Why wouldn't you accept it? She looked at me like I had asked the obvious wrong question. Because Ottawa is 6 hours away. Because this apartment becomes past tense. Because I was going to write it off. Again. I closed the laptop gently, then I sat back. Outside, the wind moved through the street. Halifax in May still couldn't quite decide if winter was finished. You have to take it, I said. She laughed once, short and unhappy. Of course you'd say that. Renata, it's a federal fellowship. It's the exact work you've been trying to get into for 3 years. I know what it is. Then you have to take it. I don't want to be a decision you're making for me. I'm not making it for you. I'm telling you that I refuse to be the reason your life gets smaller at the exact moment it's supposed to open up. I looked at her. I'm also telling you that you should take it and come back, or go and let me figure out how to be in the same city. Those aren't mutually exclusive things. Her eyes were bright. You don't know that yet. No. But I know that if you stay here because you're scared of losing this, you will eventually resent this. And I don't want to be something you resented. She looked down at the laptop. Then she said quietly, I wanted you to ask me to stay. I know, just once. I wanted to hear you say it. I know. I let a beat pass, but I think you needed me to mean it more than you needed me to say it. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up her mug, found it empty, and set it back down. I'm going to go to bed, she said, because if I keep sitting here, I'm either going to say something I can't take back or ask for something I'm not ready to ask for tonight. What if I want you to ask? Her breath caught. Renata. She looked at me with something I can only describe as terrified recognition. Don't do that, she said softly. Do what? Make it easy to believe you. She stood. I already said one true thing tonight that I wasn't planning on. I think that's my limit. She walked to her room and closed the door. Not hard. Just closed it. Which somehow felt like the most significant thing that had happened all evening. I sat in the kitchen for another hour. The radiator ticked. The street went quiet. I answered Ingrid's message, honestly, briefly, with the apology she deserved, and then I sat with the silence that was left after. In the morning, Renata was in the kitchen before me. Hair up, already dressed, making eggs with the focus of someone who was absolutely not thinking about last night. Your alarm went off 6 times, she said. I was processing. You were asleep through your own processing. Efficient. She slid one plate onto the table. Then, after a pause, a second, she sat across from me. We ate in silence for almost 2 minutes. Then she said, I'm going to accept the fellowship. I looked up. I decided at about 4 in the morning. Her fork moved. I didn't sleep either. Good, I said. She glanced at me. Which part? Both parts. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something more careful than that, more real. I answered Ingrid's message out loud, read it to her, and she nodded slowly when I was done. She sounds kind, Renata said. She is. I'm sorry that I complicated that. Don't be sorry for saying something true. She looked down at her plate. It didn't feel true until I said it. And then it felt like it had always been true. The worst kind. I set my fork down. I'm going to ask you something. Okay, when you leave for Ottawa in September, do you want to know what this is before you go? Or do you want to figure that out from there? She looked at me steadily. That was the thing about Renata. She didn't flinch from questions the way most people did. She sat with them. I want to know, she said. I don't want to spend 6 hours on a train wondering if I invented all of it. You didn't invent any of it. I know, but I'd like to hear you say it properly. When there isn't cereal involved. That got me. Genuinely. I laughed, and she laughed, and for a moment the kitchen felt like itself again, ordinary, honest hours. We did not become uncomplicated overnight. The next 3 months were the strangest of my life. We were still roommates, still splitting the hydro bill and the weekend grocery runs, but we were also something that didn't have a clean word for it yet. We went for long walks along the waterfront, on evenings that didn't quite want to end. We had one genuine argument about whether she was over-preparing for the fellowship orientation or under-preparing, which lasted 45 minutes and ended with both of us being correct. We had dinners that lasted until the candles burned down, and neither of us mentioned that we were having dinners that lasted until the candles burned down. One Saturday in July, we drove out to Peggy's Cove because she had never been, which I found quietly inexcusable for someone who'd lived in Halifax for 3 years. She stood at the rocks with the Atlantic behind her and the lighthouse catching the late afternoon light and said, "Okay, I understand why people make a fuss about this." I took a photo of her without asking. She didn't tell me to delete it. That felt like its own kind of answer. In August, I helped her pack. She had, as predicted, acquired more books than she had space for, and we spent a Saturday afternoon building a temporary shelving system out of milk crates I found on the marketplace. that she insisted on sanding and painting before using. Because that was Renata. The night before her train, we sat on the floor of her nearly empty room with takeout from the Vietnamese place on Quinpool and didn't say much. I had rehearsed things to say. They all sounded like speeches, and Renata had a low tolerance for speeches, so I handed her a folded piece of paper instead. She looked at it. "What is this?" "Practical document." She opened it. It was a list. Her Ottawa address confirmed, the bus route from Union Station to her placement office, the name of a good cafe 3 blocks from her building, 2 backup lunch spots because she forgot to eat when she was nervous. A reminder that her laptop charger was in the front pocket of her tote, and she would panic and think she'd left it. And at the bottom, I'd written, "You've been working toward this for 3 years. The fact that it feels like leaving something doesn't mean you're wrong to go." Both things are true. Renata read it twice. Then she folded it with the kind of care you use for things you're planning to keep. "You're making it very difficult to be stoic," she said. "Good." She looked up. Her eyes were bright, not crying, just too honest for the fluorescent light. "I don't want to get on that train tomorrow and wonder if this is real." "It's real." "You're sure?" "I've been sure since February. I just didn't know what to do about it while we were sharing a bathroom." She laughed, and it broke a little at the end, and she leaned her shoulder against mine, and we sat like that for a while without either of us needing to explain it. In the morning, I drove her to the train station. It was early enough that Halifax hadn't fully woken up yet. The harbor flat and gray. The Tim Hortons on Barrington already open. A city doing what cities do at 6 in the morning, regardless of what's happening inside the people moving through it. At the station, she stood with her bag and the folded paper in her coat pocket and looked at me like she was memorizing something. "I'll call when I get in," she said. "I know you will. Don't be noble about this." What does that mean? It means don't decide in 3 weeks that this is too complicated and that I'm better off without the distraction. I've seen you do that with things that matter to you. That one landed. "I won't promise me. I promise you." She nodded once, adjusted her strap, and then stepped forward and hugged me the way people hug when they don't have words left for the size of the thing. I held on. She pulled back first, but only slightly. "Ben," she said. "Yeah, I meant it." She looked at me steadily. "All of it. The cereal, everything. I know." She kissed me then, not dramatically, not like a scene, just like a decision she'd made and was done second-guessing. When she pulled back, her forehead rested against mine for 1 second. Then she picked up her bag and walked toward the platform without looking back, which I understood was the only way she could actually go. The apartment was wrong without her. Not empty. Her books were still in the living room, her spare mug on the drying rack, her color-coded calendar still on the fridge with October-marked tentative visit, confirm closer. Evidence of a person who had been present and was temporarily not. I lasted approximately 11 days before I moved the French press to a more logical cabinet location, and she called me within 24 hours because she somehow knew. "You moved my French press. I optimized the counter layout. That is a crime. It's 7 centimeters to the left. Emotionally, it's much further." Long distance was not romantic in the way people sometimes suggest. It was bad Wi-Fi and missed calls, and the specific loneliness of wanting to show someone something small, a funny sign, a weird building, a lunch that went wrong, and having to translate it into a text that never quite captures the actual thing. But it also made us honest in ways the apartment had let us avoid. We couldn't hide in proximity anymore. We had to say things, uncomfortable things, small things, true things. She told me when Ottawa made her feel like herself, when she sat in a policy meeting and knew things and said them and was listened to. I told her when Halifax felt too quiet in the way that had nothing to do with noise. She sent me photos of her new neighborhood, the canal path she'd found, the terrible kitchen layout of her sublet. I sent her photos of every building project in the city that made me think about what she'd said. The night we talked about infrastructure and drainage, and the kinds of cities people actually want to live in. 4 months in, I flew out for a long weekend in November. She met me at the airport wearing a coat I hadn't seen before and looking like someone who had figured out how to inhabit a new place without losing herself in it. "You look good," I said. "Ottawa has better ramen than Halifax. It's changed me. Deeply unfair." She grabbed my bag. "Come on, I want to show you the canal before it freezes." We walked the Rideau for 2 hours in the cold with coffee cups going lukewarm, and she pointed out every building she thought was doing something interesting or failing at something obvious. And I listened the way I always had, like she was explaining something I genuinely wanted to understand. That evening, in her small borrowed kitchen, she made pasta, and I pretended not to notice she had bought the specific bread I liked, and we talked until past midnight about the fellowship, about my firm, about a project I was trying to get assigned to that would matter, about what the next year might look like if we stopped treating the future like a problem to be cautious around. My firm has a partner office in Ottawa, I said at some point. She looked at me over her wine glass. I know. I looked it up in September. You didn't say anything. I was waiting to see if you'd say it first. Why? Because I didn't want to be the one asking you to rearrange things. I'd already said enough reckless things in a kitchen. I set my glass down. What if I want to rearrange things? She was quiet for a moment. Then, I want you to want it for the right reasons. I do. The work has to make sense. It does. I've been looking at it since October. Ben. Renata. She looked at me with the expression I had come to understand as her trying not to believe something too quickly. You're serious. I've been serious since you described yourself as a cereal box person in a moment of romantic crisis and somehow made it the most compelling thing anyone said to me. She laughed, surprised, and then the laugh turned into something softer. That was not my finest hour. It was my favorite hour. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. We sat like that for a while, the way you sit when you've stopped needing to fill the silence with anything other than the fact of being in the same room. The transfer took 4 months to arrange, not because it was complicated, but because I wanted to do it correctly, have the conversation with my project lead, understand what I'd be moving into, make sure the work was real, and not just an excuse the heart had dressed up in logistics. Renata did not once tell me to hurry. She also did not once pretend she wasn't tracking the timeline. I moved to Ottawa in March, into a place I found 2 streets over from her sublet, because we had agreed that we were doing this right, meaning not assuming, not collapsing this distance by collapsing into each other before we knew how we fit together on purpose. We lasted 6 weeks before we admitted the 2 separate apartments were an unnecessary expense and a greater inconvenience than our dignity was worth. She made a color-coded moving spreadsheet. I followed approximately 70% of it and was issued a formal notice about the rest. Our first apartment together, actually together, chosen, not accidental, was a second-floor place on a street that flooded slightly every spring and had a landlord who responded to maintenance requests within 3 business days, which felt like a luxury after Halifax. The windows were large. The kitchen was small. Renata made the same rules she had made on Roby Street with minor revisions, and I added one at the bottom. She read it. No making the coffee too dark? You've been making it wrong the entire time we've lived together. That is a bold accusation in someone else's kitchen. Our kitchen. She paused. Then the corner of her mouth moved. Our kitchen, she agreed. 2 years later, she was offered a permanent policy position with the federal government. She said yes before she finished reading the offer letter, and then called me from her office at 4 in the afternoon, making a sound I can only describe as restrained chaos. I brought dinner home that night, and we sat at the table we had bought together at a market in Hintonburg, and she talked for 90 minutes about everything she was going to try to change. And I listened the way I always had, because listening to Renata talk about things she cared about had never once felt like work. That summer, I proposed in the kitchen, not at a restaurant, not with a plan involving candles or a scenic lookout. In the kitchen, because every true thing between us had happened in a kitchen. She was standing at the counter reading a report, bare feet on the tile, wearing my old university hoodie with the engineering logo that she claimed was hers now. On the grounds of adverse possession, which she said was a real legal principle, and I said was creative theft. I set a mug of tea beside her. She looked up. I got down on one knee. Her face did something I had never seen it do before, completely unguarded. No quick remark ready, no shield up. Just her. Renata, I said, stay with me. Every city, every apartment, every argument about where the French press belongs. Every Sunday call and every bad cup of coffee, and every draft of every email you read out loud when you're scared to send it. Stay with me. She covered her mouth. Then she said, too fast, yes. which was exactly right. People ask how we got together. I usually say I went on one forgettable date and came home to the person I'd been trying not to think about for 8 months. Renata says, he came home, I said something mortifying in front of a cereal box, and then he somehow turned it into a 5-year plan. That's her. Still precise, still a little merciless, still the person who fell for a draft and loved the whole thing anyway. The crooked shelf we never got around to fixing is still in the hallway. Some things earn their place by lasting. What would you have done if your roommate looked at you one night in the most ordinary moment possible and told you the truth you'd both been carefully avoiding for years? And have you ever realized, too late, or just in time, that the person who felt like home had been right there all along? Tell me in the comments. If this one meant something to you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.